Hello, folks. It's my pleasure to welcome you back to iMoot and a wonderful session on storytelling in Moodle from Miranda Verswijvelen. I'm so sorry I stumbled on it. I'm really looking forward to this session because lesson is one of my favorite activities and Miranda is an absolute legend with using it. So please share all your wisdom on this with us. Miranda, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So my last name is Verswijvelen. As I mostly explain to people, I'm just a single contractor, but I've given myself a company name just to avoid the stumble and so that people would actually remember my name. So Learning World Design is like my little one-person company. So what I'm going to talk about today is some examples of storytelling and branched scenarios in Moodle that I've been making. For a couple of reasons, because a lot of, the more fancy branched scenario things always get done in things like Storyline and other expensive software. And I just want to show that you can also do things in native Moodle by just using good design and good writing. And so I'm going to show you an example in Moodle itself, so in Lesson, native Moodle, and one where I've used Twine that I've embedded on a Moodle page. And I've tried a few other storytelling apps that are out there, but they didn't work that well. But I'll tell you all about that. So now I'm looking for my mouse. Okay. So this is kind of what I'm going to talk about today. First, I'm just going to have a quick intro on why use stories and scenarios when you're teaching online as well. Then we're going to look at Moodle, and then I'm going to talk, and that's why I put all those blocks together, because it's all a bit like intertwined. What's the structure you use? How do you get into the elements? How did I build the lesson? How did we build the Twine, and so on. So, but first of all, we're going to have a quick look at why scenarios in stories. So stories get used a lot these days. When you just look on, international job searching sites and you type in storyteller, you'll actually find quite a few jobs. And almost all of them are in marketing. And I've used this example, which is from a charity in Norway called Children's Villages, which was a campaign to get money. And it's actually just a story where they have this little freezing little boy sitting in the cold in Norway. And the question is just, would you give your jacket to Johannes? And they filmed this with a candid camera kind of thing and saw what people were doing. So it's just a YouTube video you can find online, but it's really compelling and you're much more, let's say, compelled to give money. So it's really a sought after commodity to be good storytellers in marketing and for charities as well. But we really should use its power for learning more. And I've got a little static example which I loved, which I found online, which is mathematics, to explain some, mathematics concepts, but with love stories. And it's much easier to remember that than a definition. So that's, I really love those, but they're static, and there's not much more you can do with them. But the real power of stories for learning obviously lies in interactive stories. So this is a bit of a, let's say, a twist that I created for this slide on that same Johannes story. So if you make it more than a video and give people a choice and saying like, what are you going to do? This is your situation. This is the situation you see. And what are you going to do? And so what choice do you make? What's the consequence of your choice? What's happening? And so an interactive story is very, very powerful. And I try to use it as much as I can in all the learning I design. And it's actually not that hard to find your structures to make a story, because basically almost all stories have this big structure. You've got a starting situation, you've got a challenge, things happen within that challenge, and then there's some kind of ending, like either you end up in a good situation, you end up in a bad situation, or this thing, kind of the end, becomes the start of a new little challenge. So it's actually quite straightforward, but not that easy to write always. I'm just going to show you a quick example, and some of the listeners here will recognize that little example. So if, for example, your learning objective is that people need to call 777 for security if there's a fire hazard outside the building. That's your learning objective. It's from one of the courses that I made for the hospital when I worked there. And so the scenario we came up with was you're going for lunch, so you're outside the building. And the challenge you have is you see a man throwing a burning cigarette in a bin on a parking lot. So what do you do? And there we had 4 possible options. So for example, one of them was like, call the hospital and you get a waiting music. The right option was to call 777 and security handles the situation. So, but it's always each learning objective. You can actually transfer that into a little story or several stories that, make up a bigger learning objective. So I'm not talking too fast, Lindy. I'm not chopping away. It's all fine?
Oh, you're going fantastically. It's really perfect.
Okay, thank you. This is just a little example. And so this is, let's say, the theoretical background. So first of all, the really, really important thing, as all of you undoubtedly know, is to have really good basic learning needs analysis. What are the learning outcomes we are after? What are the behaviors and the skills that we want people to learn from this? And those will define your story, they will define your choices. And from that, you make the goal clear, you decide on a setting, you decide on characters, and you write your decision moments and consequences. And I'll go further in that in this presentation, deeper into how you decide things like characters and situations. So that's what you basically get to. And then you start writing the nitty-gritty. Your start situation, what are people saying to each other, your characters. You write multiple choice questions because in the end, your decisions are multiple choice questions. But obviously, they're slightly better than your usual multiple choice questions. And there's things to decide on endings and visuals, depending if you can do that or not in the tool you're working with. So that's a little bit of an intro of how you get to your why we use stories. And actually, now we're going to move to Moodle, and I'm going to take a little gamble here. To see if you guys like my explanations or not. That is, I'm going to send you to the course I've got. So on my course page in iMoot, there's a lesson called The Quest of Prince Martin. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to kind of go there and have a play in it and then come back. So this is a gamble. No one might come back. So. Miriam, you already know what all the outcomes are. So this, just to explain, this is the Save the Prince lesson. And Miriam and Tabitha and I made this. We came up with this for Moodle Moot last year, where we did a workshop on native tools, how to teach with the native tools in Moodle. And yeah, you'll see we had a lot of fun with very, very silly puns on learning management systems. And yeah. Some of the puns are really, really cheesy, so be warned. So if you could all give me, I don't know which tool to use, maybe give me a quick yes, no when you're back. That'd be good. I'll just open the poll. I know this is going to be awkward with me being silent, so I'll just keep on talking. Oh, I closed the poll. Okay. Start a poll. There we go. I clicked on publish. All right. Okay, when most people have clicked yes, I'll just return to where we are. You can have a little extra play later because there's quite a few different paths. You're just voting just to see whether you've done it so I can go on when most people have had a little short play. Yeah, to say you're back. Okay, since most people seem to be back, I'm just going to go on. So we've got 9 people. That's enough. All right, so the little quest of Prince Martin. So as I said, Tabitha, Miriam, and myself came up with this idea to have a storytelling example, branched scenario for a workshop we did at Moodle New Zealand last year. And we just used a topic for the whole workshop we gave, which was mythical creatures. So basically the branched scenario in here, all the characters are very, very fictional. The branched scenario in here, and here you see some of our workings, was supposed to teach people about characteristics of different mythical creatures. So while you're making choices and you're sent back before things, when things go wrong because you've chosen the wrong creature, you also learn about some of their characteristics, like they might be not suitable to, be fast on land, or they have certain character traits that keep them from doing the task. And so by going through all the paths, you actually learn about all these characteristics. So what I'm showing here is our initial, let's say, table with characteristics on paper. Then next, Tabitha made this amazing mind map for another kind of learning lesson we made where people could, discover characteristics as well. But this was really useful for us to write the story as well, because it kind of divvies up what the creatures are like. So are they animal shaped? Are they humanoid? Can they change their shape? Can they fly? And so on. So we have all the characteristics, and that's the big picture that I based the story on. And then next, and that's a really important one that I want to stress for all the stories that I ever make, is plan it well. And definitely everybody here who has worked in lessons, it's like a zillion times more important than in any other tool. Like, plan your lesson well, because once you've started making pages, it can be such a nightmare to change things. And that's something that Miriam and Tabitha will be working with you with, and when they do their session about lessons and how we could make the lesson module better. So don't miss that one. So one of the things that was really important while we were making this were the names of all those pages, so that when you have to change things, you actually know where to go. So I think I restarted like 3 or 4 times, because you see how many pages these are. And I just got caught up in, like, you know, send elf 1, send elf 2, send elf 3. Definitely not a good idea, because I was completely lost as to where I was. So I ended up changing the titles of the pages to I'm sending Pegasus. So that's my first decision. And then I send elf instead, and that's linked to that. So that each name of each page is really unique. So you can easily find it on your mind map that you've made, or your scenario here. So very complex. One of the other things we did was, I think it was Tabitha who just made all the empty pages for me based on this. And then I was just writing stories and inventing silly puns. And so having all those pages ready to fill in was really great. So that's also a great tip when you're making a very complicated lesson with loads of pages like this one. Prepare all your pages up front and then fill them in. Try to not to do it one by one. Yes, same thing. Miriam checked all my spelling and grammar, which is also a bit of a nightmare, because you kind of sometimes your text, you end up with having text that doesn't really fit what came before. So reviewing is reviewing is a hell of a job as well. But that's not a lesson problem. That's in general, when you make branch scenarios, that is one of your biggest tasks, is reviewing every path you can take. So just a quick view of what our lesson thing looked like. So this, I couldn't get it all on a screenshot. This is about 4 times as long. So these are all our pages. And as you can see, and as you know, you have no idea really what goes to what. You have the jumps, but it doesn't tell you very much in this format. So wouldn't it be great if that looked a bit different? So that's the lesson 1 that I'm introducing to you. So it would be great if you can have another play and go through the different paths. One of the things I also discovered, and that goes for the example in Twine that I'm going to show as well, is one of the important things you need to do is plot out your winning path first, so that you can work around that. That really helps to keep you organized. So you plot out the best path that brings you to the success end for your hero, for Prince Martin in this case. And then all the other side branches, you can work from there. But at least you've got that first one that you set up, that you're sure about, and that doesn't change anymore. So that's also a really good strategy that I discovered. Now let's have a quick look at some of the things you need to think about when you're writing. So the characters and setting. So obviously, this one was a bit of a play thing, but still most of those things that are here still apply, except the characters are plausible. That's maybe not one that we really used, but we definitely used the goals of the course. So the goals for this lesson were to, let people in a playful way discover the important characteristics of all those mythical creatures and remember those in a fun way. It's also nice to have a few cliffhangers. So, and I'll show that in the Twine that I've made. If you have, for example, your intro text is getting a bit too long, it's quite nice to just split it up and not have 3 choices or 4 choices, but just one, a sentence that you can click on that has a bit of a cliffhanger kind of, so let's find out what happened after that. Something like that people click on and they get the other next little piece and your intro is broken up. So it's quite nice to use in branched scenarios when you've got a bit too much to tell in a certain situation. And certainly your story, when you're working for realistic learning, so not a fun thing like what we made, you try to represent the wished for behavior or the behavior that needs to change. So it needs to be really realistic. And in a sense, even though this was just a story full of puns, it does do that. So we want people to choose the right character traits for a certain goal. So trying to get Prince Martin to the end of the story to be the hero. I've also added a little dialogue for this lady here, because it's something you often see in branched scenarios out there that aren't so good, is those completely ludicrous ways of talking in characters that wouldn't really exist. So a typical one, I've made quite a few courses in my career on document management, and you always come across these persons in the fictional office who, introduce themselves like, "Oh, I've learned all about this new document management system. Let me tell you all about it." It's like very cringy, but you come across that quite often, and it's often used as dialogue. So don't do that. Also, when you give feedback on a decision, this kind of dialogue is so unrealistic, and that's why I love using consequences. So when she says something after, this person says something after you've made a choice, it needs to be something realistic. Nobody would talk this way and talk to you about policies unless they're very boring people. So they must be talking normal language. That's what we try to do, even in the Prince Martin one. It's a bit fun, bit cheeky, and the type of what a story like that would be when you read it in a book. Need to be engaging, short dialogues, and they also need in some way to communicate the goals, and people need to be interested in what the consequence in the dialogue is. And that's going to be a bit clearer in the Twine example that I made. So I'll spend a little bit more time on this one. So Melanie, your e-learning can then probably be with that kind of answers, and they will think it's very, very realistic. Something I want to spend some time on is the choices, because basically that's the heart of your learning scenarios. How do you write really good choices? And it's very much related to how do you write really good multiple choice questions. So the example that I give here is, the fictional situation here could be like John's coming to talk to you in the office about a problem, and you give these three choices. And quite often you will find that also in not well-written branched scenarios, things where it's really, really obvious what the right one is. And that, so talking to John about this problem, obviously, in any course, that will probably be the right answer. Did you tell someone to get lost? No. And that's why I always try to work with very realistic options. And that's the ones you get from the work floor, or the students, or whoever you're working with, is really trying to gauge which options they would try and they would think might be right. Because you want to make it as realistic as possible, because that's what gives real consequences as well, and they need to be a challenge. They can't be black and white. So you got to acknowledge the gray zones in their thinking. You got to make sure that they really have to think. Also, no over-eager feedback, which I showed in the previous slide. It's like, oh no, that's not correct. So all these things, you got to avoid them. You got to make it as realistic as possible. And writing these decisions is often a very, very, yes, common incorrect responses is definitely one. So the example that I gave in the beginning of the fire safety course, the 4 options that people had, we actually sourced them from the work floor. And we changed those options, I think 3 or 4 times before we had them final. So we didn't invent them. We just, our subject matter expert just went around and asked people, so what would you do in this situation? And those were the answers that we put in. So having that realistic part is really good. Now, another little, and people that know me know that I always take quite a lot from games as well. And in games, these are often the choices that you have when you have to make a decision in all kinds of games. So it's quite easy if you think about these to really make your choices. So there's obviously the no choice, you've done something completely wrong. There's a disaster now. In the game, that would be, oops, you died. The yes, as I jump to the next one, next challenge. But more often, your answers will be in the range of yes, but, and no, and. So in a yes, but, it's like, yes, that was the right decision, or was like a right decision, but now this or this has happened also because you decided that. So that's one of your gray choices, like that, yeah, that was good, but not completely. And the no and is where your decision wasn't right and you've made it worse. So both of these often happen in games. Like, you've conquered some monster, but oops, actually you've done the right thing in conquering it, but it's now spawned 4 others, for example. And the no and is like, this was the wrong thing, and now you're surrounded. So, but you can use this structure to make your different decision points in a learning story as well. I find it works really well to write. I don't know what. Oh, okay. So from those choices, you go on to the consequences. And that helps to make people learn from failure and from success. What I always like is to make people laugh as well, and to entice repeat entries by making some of the consequences, when they're bad consequences, really funny. So that they are enticed to kind of try that scenario over again and just do things wrong to see what happens. And the more you do scenario, the more you learn. I once was at a demonstration of some big simulation software for truckies, so they could try in a virtual environment to kind of drive with trucks with these big extra bits at the back. I don't know what they call, like big double trucks, to go around roundabouts. And the people who made that simulation software actually found that most of the time people would just try to tip the trucks instead of trying to practice the right way of doing that. And in the end, they learned more from the failure by how do I make this tip over. That actually taught them what not to do in real life. So quite often learning from failure in a fun way can teach you what the right way is. And that's quite important in stories as well. Okay, let's have a look at my Twine example now that we've had some looks at those structures and elements that you use, and we'll apply that to my second example. So the course that I made this for was for Unitech, the Polytech they used to work for, now contract a bit for. So the course that I made was on supervision skills. So basically it's a course for lecturers to teach them how to be a really good supervisor when they're supervising students with their research work. So for masters and PhDs and so on. And after mapping the learning needs out, we found that there were actually 3 big skills we needed to work around, which was time management, which was for themselves and for the student, giving support, and giving really good feedback. And so obviously you can give people all the tips and, good practice in like zillions of resources, but it's still much better to practice those. So I came up with 2 fictional students that each had their own personality and their own background and their way of studying that people discovered in a story. And then afterwards, they were actually working on their research in a new story, and you had to make choices with things that happened. So the whole thing obviously had to be in Moodle. That's the tool they use, and it had to be either native or free software, so that I could give them the file and they could maintain it afterwards when necessary. So that's how I tried out a whole number of free tools for storytelling and choices that were out there. Because I tried making it in lessons, but forgive me, I can't really recall why it didn't work. Probably because I didn't have Miriam and Tabitha to make my pages for me. So I tried and then I completely failed. I think there were some things that I wanted to do, because in Twine, you can actually use some variables as well in the background, some variables that can help you to see whether people have already passed a certain point. So, which is really, really cool. So even though Twine is really, that's my little course. These are the 3 skills. Sorry, I'm just running ahead in my talk, ahead of my slides. So using Twine and 2 very simple graphics for fictional students, I came up with these stories. And if you think a lesson is complicated, this is just a part of what my Twine structure looked like. So I had loads and loads of consequences, and I learned the same story, the same things with the Prince Martin stories. I actually ended up doubling up quite a lot of pages because it became too confusing. I tried to be really economical and kind of go back to similar pages when I thought they were almost the same. But yeah, in the end, I just doubled things up because it just became too complicated to keep track of my paths. So basically what the stories are about is you've got a student called Mark and a student called Nisha. And Mark is a very successful student before he starts his studies. But you find in the initial conversation, which is also a Twine, but a linear one, you find out about some character traits that then come back in the next story, which actually poses a problem. So you're expecting from Mark that he sends in his first chapter, and he's like a week late. And so you get a choice to either send an email or this is one of my drawings. So you get the choice to send them an email or give them a phone call or, send them a mail to invite them for a meeting. So it's one of your first choices. And so actually, none of these is right or wrong. Once you choose one of those, your next question will be, so what are you going to say when you phone him? And you get another bunch of choices. Or what are you going to put in the email? And you get some different ways of saying things. And after that, it's still not, clear whether it's the right path or not, because you send that email and you get something back. And you have to gauge from Mark's reaction, kind of like, "Ooh, that's my consequence." So he didn't seem too happy. So, for example, this one here says, you've asked them, are you there yet? How far are you? And he doesn't seem to be happy. So I put that feedback in my story. I don't say that maybe that wasn't a good idea. I just say Mark is a bit taken back by this question, blah, blah. And so you're answering him again. And so the same thing, I have a number of paths that end wrongly. And then I send people to go back. But at that point, they've already made 5 choices. And there is one perfect path, which consists of about 8 or 9 choices to get you to the end. So you can imagine it was really, really complicated, but people love it, and it's very, very powerful. So one of the other things that I did in Moodle, so I've embedded it in a page. So the Twine is in a page, and you can actually see that, and I don't dare to share my screen because that went all wrong yesterday. So I've got the 2 Twines in the course that are in my course page for iMoot. So it's embedded in a page, works really well. And on the side, in one of the blocks, I've got links to the practical tips for feedback, time management, and support. So that people can actually look it up and see whether they can gauge what the best answer is. So they can actually look at material and apply it immediately. So either they can do a bit of a guessing game and go through, or they can check, let's say, the guide on the side to see what would be the best answer. And that's also a really good way of learning, like checking your theory and then applying it immediately to a situation. I tried a few other tools than Twine. One of them is called Inkle Writer. Some of you might be familiar with that one. It's way prettier than Twine. It's also free, but it's online, and you can then embed your Inkle story. But yeah, I couldn't get it right in Moodle. I think it was because it was using frames and frames or something. It just didn't give me the full page. I tried all kinds of things to make it work, which was unfortunate because it's slightly prettier than Twine. Yeah. Now the advantage of Twine was also that you can download it and work on it offline, and you can also export the text, which was really good. So I exported that, and my subject matter expert went through it. It's not a perfect export, but it's quite okay to check, which is also one of the things that Lesson obviously doesn't have. So you can't export all your text unless you print off all your pages and then, put them kind of in a pattern on a disk and have someone read them. So that's one of the good things you can do with Twine, is export the thing, plus take a screenshot of your overview of the structure, the spaghetti structure that I showed you, and then give it to your expert to check everything. Oops. And that's almost me. So the toolbox to do your branched scenarios is obviously pen and paper, whiteboard, lots of planning before you even make something. Then I learn a lot from games, interactive fiction. There's quite a lot of there's something called Story Stylus. There's something called Game of Choices. There's textadventures.co.uk. There's like tons of interactive fiction these days. It's really a big revival. You even got phone apps that are mostly for teens, but they're quite interesting. They're like, teen girl love stories, but they're quite interesting to study in the way they work because they're text-based. So the modern teenager that people say doesn't want to do these things, they're actually reading on their phone. Yeah, branch track. Branch track, we used that at the DHB for a little bit. But it's very, very focused on like sales conversations. But it's a really cool tool. I used it in the beta version, and that's why I got a really good price when we actually bought it, because I was one of the early testers. But it's become very, very expensive. They do have fantastic support though. When you buy Branch Track, the guy who's heading it up, who's in Ukraine, I think, somewhere, somewhere there, Ukraine or Azerbaijan or something like that. He actually plans a Skype call, personal Skype call with you to take you through the tool and talk about what you want to do with it. So I thought that was pretty awesome. But it's very expensive, and you can do this in other things as well. Captivate Storyline, obvious, but I find in Storyline, and I don't know who else works in Storyline except obviously Miriam and Tabitha, if you make a really complicated scenario, it's quite hard to keep track of it even in something like Storyline or Captivate. So Twine is still an option there to almost make your initial planning and then make it in a fancier tool. Chat Mapper is purely to map dialogues. That gets used a lot for games, people who make adventure games. To write well, the obvious, read books, watch movies, watch series, all helps, always gives you inspiration. For the Prince Martin story, it probably was really good that I love, I love fantasy books, so that helps. For mind mapping, the one you saw was MindMap that we used, which is a Google plugin. But different kinds like Bubble and what else? MindMeister. What I really like for with MindMap is that you can also have those dotted lines that link up things that are actually in different branches, because that's something you end up with quite often, like things are actually linked from one branch all of a sudden to another, and you can't do that in all mind mapping software. So I'm almost that was me, and happy to get any questions on that and further explanations and tools I've tried, and Yes, that was good timing. I didn't know it was going to then be that well. So any questions? And just go and have a play with the Prince Martin story and also with the 2 Twine stories to see what I did. And also feel free to,
Sorry, I love the Prince Martin story. I've been giggling at that while I've been watching your session.
It's for a very specific audience.
It is. Just one question though. I commented on it, and I think Tabitha or Melanie may have responded to me. That you mentioned using multiple copies of the same content in your Meet Mark Twine. Is there any way for you to track the changes in the content to make it easier for you to update it later, or is it more just do what you need to be most efficient in that particular short-term moment and be aware of the consequences for later?
So Twine also it's very simple to use, but that has its consequences. So there's no real tracking of what you've changed. So the advantage was that I could export it to Word, so I had like a track changes trail in there.
Very cool.
but not in the software itself. And the reason I ended up copying things was that there was always something slightly different in the consequence that I then noticed while going through my test run. I was like, that's not completely right, is it? That's it's like, because I've come from these two choices ago, and that doesn't map anymore now. So it ended up being a question of copying situations to reflect, let's say, 2-3 choices ago. Yeah.
No, and I think learners really appreciate that it's been tailored to where they're up to, rather than just, oh, I'm back here again.
Yeah.
I can completely understand adjusting for where they're up to in the scenario. That's really cool. I'm just going to throw open for chat to see if there are any other questions. And while we're waiting for people to get their typing fingers warmed up, thank you so much for that session. That was just awesome. There's some new tools in there that I haven't seen before, and I'm now itching to go and play with them. It's lovely to see Lesson getting some of the credit that it deserves, because it really is a fantastic tool, and also to see some alternatives to it. Twine is something I hadn't come across before. Thank you so much for your time, Miranda. Just checking, are there any questions, folks, over in chat? Even if you can type an ellipsis to let me know you're coming with a question.
Doesn't seem like there's any questions. Well, my email's on there.
Everyone's just taking in all the information you shared with us. Thank you so much, Miranda. It was an absolute pleasure to have you with us. The presentation will be available on YouTube down the track. I'm not entirely sure of the timing, but it has been recorded, so it will be available soon.
Okay, I can upload the PDF on the course page if people want. Yeah,
brilliant.
That's fine. Yeah, I will do that immediately after this.
We'll leave you to carry on to the next session. And Miranda, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure to have you with us.
Okay, thank you. Bye, everyone.